Fred and I just returned from Payne's Prairie up in north central Florida, kind of located between Gainesville and Micanopy, which is not my canopy. Micanopy. And wonderful place. We hiked over 2 days, 15 miles there. And
but you know what? It's worth the walk because you get some great photographic opportunities.
So it was wonderful.
Can't really complain. And you never know. Things you can be surprised or maybe even slightly disappointed, not seeing what you would hope for. But then there's always something else to train your camera lens on.
Yeah, and I understand. Now we went there here in February, but there are different things you're going to see, different animals,
right,
other than ones that are permanently in the park, depending on the time of year you go. And Payne's Prairie, as we understand, is a distinguished title of being the very first state preserve in Florida. It was set aside and protected in 1970, so it's relative recent, but first preserve here.
Well, a lot of people would say, what's it named after? Why is it called Payne's Prairie?
We figured it's because all the walking you do, you're in such pain.
Well, actually, in the late 1600s.
P-A-Y-N.
Yeah, P-A-Y. Late 1600s, Payne's Prairie was the home of La Chua, the largest cattle ranch in Spanish Florida. Mm-hmm. What happened then?
Yeah. A couple hundred years later, the Seminole Indians occupied the area, and the prairie was named after their chief, King Payne. And what's happened to the poor Seminoles is the Georgia land plantation owners were raiding because a lot of the runaway slaves were going in and living with the Seminoles, and it slowly drove them out. As I understand that they one time had log cabins there. They were quite a civilized tribe, but they were drove, and then eventually they started the Seminole Wars in the mid-1800s.
Well, the area is 21,000 acres. It's Savannah and Alachua County. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it is, aside from being supported as a state park, it's also a U.S. national landmark.
Yeah.
National natural landmark.
Natural landmark. Yeah.
And it's interesting because both I-75 and U.S. 441 cross it.
Yeah, so if you ever gone down into South Florida and came down U.S. I-75, when you went through the Gainesville area, you actually passed right through the prairie.
Right, through kind of one side, whereas 441 pretty much goes right through the center.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that they did
it's kind
that.
of a cool road. If you go 441, you see it on both sides. You can stop at all the different entrances.
Yeah, there is a little
it's
place
cool.
You can stop, and there's a short boardwalk that goes out into
the water,
the lake there.
And then there's also the bluff.
But it also, trouble is, just like what they've done with 41 down in South Florida, it cuts off the two parts of the lake. I mean, it's actually divided in half, which
it does divide it, that's a sad thing.
That's a bad thing.
And they have talked about doing pass-throughs. One of the things that you see on 75, it's on 75, I think.
Yeah.
Is a looks like an overpass, but it has all these plants. And
the problem is it's pretty tiny compared to
it's small.
And
but at least it is a wildlife passover, so they're not trying to cross the interstate. And they say it's relatively successful in allowing the animals to move from one side to the other.
Safely.
Safely, yes.
Without being roadkills. South Florida, what they've done in some areas is they've lifted the road up, raised up 41, but it's only like a mile. And I know our friend Clyde Butcher has said it should be at least 5 miles, and whether or not it will eventually get more. But
we have to do our due diligence in this state to take care of our national treasures and what they call the real Florida. Mm-hmm. Because what you see nowadays in a lot of areas is not the real Florida, it is the tourist Florida.
That's right.
And snowbird Florida.
Well, more on the Payne's Prairie. The naturalist William Bartram came to Florida from Philadelphia this is way back in the 1700s. He made his way to the Payne's Prairie, and he called it the Great Alachua Savannah. He wrote the alligators he saw there, said they were so abundant that if permitted by them, they could walk over any part of the basin and the river upon their heads, which slowly float and turn about like knotty chunks of logs and wood. And this particular article said this holds true today, but we wouldn't recommend trying it. Well, actually, we did not see any alligators in there with 441 or that area at all. The only place we saw really alligators was in the La Chua Trail.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But
Interestingly
I don't
enough, though, a young man, a photographer, we were talking. He said he had gone out to the basin area that we'd been earlier, and he said,
oh, that's right.
he was going to go ahead and do it. He still had mud all up and down his legs.
Yeah,
where
he actually took his shoes off and went barefoot.
and decided to walk out to the tower because it was very wet out there. And he said he got part of the way and realized there was a very large gator lying right in the middle of the trail. So he turned around and came back. He said, that's the end of today.
Yeah, so they're there, but not. In fact, to be all honest, I've seen a whole lot more alligators in
other places,
Mayaca or Circle B than I did in Payne's Prairie. So maybe they're there, but you couldn't walk across the lake on their backs. And if they're kind of hidden, maybe they're down in the mud.
Right. They do blend in quite well. Well, the bison were brought in from
this is the amazing thing that
Oklahoma.
That there's bison in Florida. And as Fred said, these bison were originally introduced back in 1975 from Oklahoma. And that's right?
The reason they did this is the bison's range once extended this far south to the northern part of the state.
At one time,
they decided, let's go ahead and introduce about 10. What happened is that, now this was a few years back, there were between 50 and 70 head of bison in the herd. And so they were worried about the males because they were getting aggressive, because there are people that live near the savannah.
The tourists there too.
And tourists and people. So they removed some of them. Luckily, we got a chance to talk to one of the rangers and tell him what he said.
The ranger said that right now there's probably between 40 and 50. I don't think I have an exact number. And we asked whether they did any kind of a roundup or brought them in. And they don't do that on a regular basis like they do in South Dakota at Custer State Park. They just basically let them roam around there. But he said that the females were getting older, and I think there was only 1 or 2 males now, so the herd really is increasing. But the prairie can only handle so many bison.
Right.
So
he said 50 would be the top number, and they try to keep them between high 30s and low 40s as far as the herd. And they're not breeding on a regular basis. It's very intermittent.
Right. And we also heard it from somebody else that was volunteering there that at one point that they had actually brought a helicopter in and did round them up.
And that may have been when they were trying to thin the herd.
But they don't do that. Yeah, and they don't do that on a regular basis.
They don't, according to the nice lady, they don't really do that anymore. It's just very hard to do and gets very expensive to try to. And a lot of them can stay fairly well hidden because it is not a wide open area. The prairie out there has the basin area, which stays wet because it has river and lake that it borders on it. It's just a very wet area. And because of the hurricanes that we had this year, it overwhelmed the dikes that were supposed to hold some of the water back, and the area flooded. Mm-hmm. They're saying it's drying out better, but there's still a lot of trail areas in there that are very mucky. They warn people, you're only going to get to go so far unless you have
We're going to show you here
the
Bowling Bluff Trail. You couldn't even get to the elevated platform because it was so wet.
So, it's one of those things where nature does its thing.
But the permanent residents should mention, too, what else have we got here besides bison?
Well, of course, horses. Mm-hmm. And they were Florida cracker horses.
Yep.
Which are used by
the cowboys here in Florida were called crackers because they used whips.
That's how they rounded up.
That was actually a derogatory term.
To an extent.
No, it wasn't to an extent. It was Harper's Bazaar. It was there was a popular Western author that wrote it, and he did not like or had no appreciation for the Florida cowboy, and he's the one that turned this one. They're just a bunch of crackers. And later on, he began to appreciate them.
Because he hung out with them.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, anyway, these horses, but the idea of these horses, they were pretty hardy animals. The way that they used to drive their cattle to brand them and to check them for disease and then cull out the ones that they were going to sell, these were longhorn. Cattle had been brought from Texas. The area around Florida was either very wet or scrubby, what we call upland. Pine uplands.
Pine uplands, yeah.
And then you have palmetto everywhere. So trying to get in there to to drive a herd.
Yeah, you don't have the big wide open spaces like that.
So they would use the bull whips and the sound of it to kind of push the cattle to where they wanted to enclose them and then check them over, brand the ones they needed to, or mark them in their method, and then release most of them and then keep some of them for, of course, food.
Yep.
So right now, with the 6 that they brought, seems like we have, they said about 30 horses now are descendant.
Yeah, we saw 6.
And the
At a distance.
Yes. The interesting thing is that it's been tough. They say some days they'll come almost right up to the visitor center. And
Yeah,
some
we
of the
saw
other buildings.
signs where they had their hoof prints and
And the road apples.
the road apples. But we're going to stop yakking, and
Yeah.
we're going to go ahead and show you. We're not just going to talk about it. We're actually going to show you. So,
We're going to share it with you.
yeah,
Let's
go
go.
ahead. Okay, well, Fred is changing lenses here because we're on Payne's Prairie, and this is Bowling Bluff Trail, which we were told is the best place to see bison, and sure enough, here they are. So you don't have to go to South Dakota, you don't have to go to Yellowstone. We got bison right here in our backyard in Florida. Wild bison and wild horses, which we've only seen from a distance. Let's go take a look at the bison. Yeah, as you can see, we can't go any further as it is quite muddy. We don't have our mud boots in there, and the bisons are over there.
Well, even if we did, we'd probably sink up to our knees.
Maybe.
It's pretty mucky.
The bison seem to be
They seem
maneuvering it okay.
handling it.
All right, well, it's about 8 a.m. next morning. Fred and I are back in Bowling Bluff Trail here at Payne's Prairie. And you can see if maybe the bison are a little more cooperative, a little closer than they were yesterday. But this does seem to be the best spot to see the bison, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and supposedly in good mornings, you can see the horses as well.
Yeah, and I also had yesterday, Fred spotted a red-shouldered hawk. There were a lot of glossy ibis around, and sandhill cranes.
Yeah,
as
quite
well
a few
as,
of them. They were having
they were
big
having
conversation.
a sing-along down there. So
it's not a bad place. You got to hike a little bit to get where you're going, but hey, that's,
yeah, I think the hike to the observation tower is 2.5 miles.
right.
And we can't quite get there unless you had boots, because
It is very muddy.
it's muddy.
You can even
wet
see
and muddy.
where the bison are moving kind of slow through it because
Yes. We want them laid down right in the middle of them.
it must have felt pretty cool after the heat of the day.
Yep. So, well, we'll soon know what we're going to get here.
There you go.
Well, we're back here, and unfortunately, you can see they're behind us. Well, what you can't see is bison, because they ain't here this morning.
Or at least they're too far away.
Or they're so far away, so they've wandered off. So, despite the fact they're usually more active in the morning and in the afternoon, they must be so active this morning they've wandered off somewhere. But we do have, and I don't know if you can see it on the GoPro, but here in behind us, a bunch of sandhill cranes. So we're going to see if we can get any decent photos. There was a bunch of them just flew over, but they went the wrong way. Looks like we also got some flycatchers up here, or little swallows, something very active over above us. But right now it's I don't know, about 8. It's 9 o'clock, 9 a.m. All right, well, we kind of gave up. I think we failed to mention Limpkins also.
Yeah.
Found which we're not even seeing or hearing them this morning. So unfortunately, the park gates don't open till 8 a.m. So we really can't get here much earlier. 8's the earliest you can get in. And of course, it closes at sundown.
And this is not at the main gate. There's an actual separate entrance for
Right.
the Bowling Bluff Trail. So
In fact, if you go to the main gate entrance, I believe it's $6 per carload, unless you have a state park pass.
and
And the individual ones, if you don't, are $2, and I
Right.
think it's on the honor system.
so nice thing about it, if you're going to be visiting Florida, it may be worth your while to get an annual pass. And if you live in Florida, it's definitely worth your while because it's good at just about every state park and preserve
Yep.
in Florida.
And I think, was it $60, or unless it's gone up now? Something like that.
Oh, also, there is veterans discount for you vets.
Yes.
I take advantage of that, and it helps defray the cost.
Unfortunately, I don't think they have a Florida resident or senior discount.
No, not that I know of.
So anyway, we're going to head back. We may go back to the main entrance, see if the wild horses would be a little more cooperative for us. Yeah, I want to mention one more thing. Please pick up your trash. Don't leave it laying around in here. I mean, this park is actually pretty pristine, but we found, I think, an aluminum can at one point someone had discarded, and this whole water bottle, which I nearly swung in the muck out there to get it. So if you haul it in, haul it back out again. Other thing we wanted to mention, that we were kind of surprised, this is February, and lack of mosquitoes. We haven't had to use any bug spray whatsoever. Now, that may not be the case if you're here in late spring, maybe early summer, and in the fall. And
Anytime we have wet season,
Yeah.
although technically Florida's been under a drought because we're not having reliable rain, it's kind of hit and miss.
yeah, but any rain and the mosquitoes
rain?
come out with a vengeance, so
Yeah.
just
That's
keep that
true.
in mind. And make sure you have plenty of drinking water with you too. And we found that Bowling actually has 2 trails here. And we got on a second trail which seemed a little shorter, and there appears to be some kind of a little corral over here. I don't know if it's for holding wayward bison, sick bison, checking bison, but we'll show you that here in a moment. We were, as I had mentioned earlier, we were talking to the ranger here, and he was mentioning, I was wondering how many bison they have in here. He said it's probably in the 30s,
Upper 30s,
upper
lower
30s
40s.
possibly.
But she says it's about the maximum. He said if anything above 50 would be too many,
Yeah, and he said
To
this is
sustain.
pretty much a non-reproducing
or
herd.
intermittently non-reproducing.
Yeah,
Yes.
because most of the females are getting older,
Right.
and he said we're talking about bringing more in. Yeah, good morning, how are you doing?
Not too bad for an old guy, you?
Yeah, good.
Doing well, thank you.
So, I think he said that maybe the 40s would be the most this park could actually handle, so they try to keep the size of the herd down. And
Although if they're not
unlike,
reproducing that much,
Yep.
then the only thing that they've talked about doing if the herd starts dwindling because some of the females getting older and the males don't seem to be as active, so they may introduce a new male into the herd.
yep. So, I think we saw 6, so we saw less than 25% of the bison here. And I don't know how many, I didn't ask about the wild horses, how many there are. But they do not round them up like they do in South Dakota. They just let them, bison be bison. And they're basically on their own. You know, Fred brought up a good point here that as far as a roundup here, it'd be kind of difficult, if not impossible, because it's so wet and swampy down there with the
In the basin area, right?
yeah, Lake Alachua Lake, or the
Yeah, near the lake.
yep.
and it's all kind of wetland or just pure.
So even if they had,
Mucky.
I don't even think.
By the way, if you've never
horses-
stepped into mucky soil like we got here, woo-wee.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to go any further, if it remains wet, definitely take boots. I don't think you really need waders, but definitely you want boots that come up to your thighs.
And by the way, make sure they're snug because you'll walk right out of them.
Oh yeah,
in
it's
this
falling
mud.
right out. So
We've actually had that happen to us where
Yep.
you get kind of stuck and then you're trying to hold on to the boot while you try to walk your way in or out.
it seems like no matter where we go here, the sun keeps flaring in there on us. Or Fred's just unusually bright this
I'm a
morning.
bright
I'm
guy.
not sure.
That's what it is.
Okay, here we are again, and
Heading toward the
we're
visitor
going
center.
down to the visitor center, and we're going to go up to the tower and see if the horses are there.
And if they are,
So,
we might see if we can get
See
a
if we
little
get any
some
closer.
photos.
I know when we walked the trail around the lake, there was a lot of vegetation.
Couldn't see
Had
much.
it blocked. You couldn't see anything. You could see the first crap in the trail. You didn't know that they were there at one time,
The
but
droppings, yes, the
couldn't see any horses.
road apples.
So, road apples, there we go. So, yeah, we're here back at the visitor center. We're going to head down just a short distance to the tower. Well, here we are on the observation tower, and we can see horses again, about the same place they were yesterday, way off in the distance. I guess they're horses or bison. From what I see is just little black dots. And unfortunately, even if we take the trail around, we wouldn't be able to see them because of the vegetation that blocks the view over there. A little word of warning that Fred and I walked our legs off a couple miles one way, one mile the other way. We stopped at a looked like a parking area, which we thought was Lachua Trail, a little park. You can get there from the trail. It's a long walk. Keep going, because that is not the north entrance to
No.
the state park.
Kind of throws you off a little bit because there's multiple places you can stop, well, at least two.
Yeah, so don't make the same mistake we did. And so we are here finally in Lachua Trail.
Being rumbled overhead.
I don't know if we'd mentioned that this was the old railroad line, and here's where the line used to go up overhead. This is Lachua Trail, which I heard an echo. So it appears that Lachua is a short boardwalk out to an observation platform. It looks like it's more historical than for wildlife. And it looks like most of it's kind of dried up here. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. A little different looking.
Yeah.
So we're in the dry part of the prairie, evidently.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's not supposed to be dry. It looks like it's just dried up. Well, Fred and I are having a lot of fun here
Yes.
photographing snail
Yes.
kites. Lots
been
of
here
snail kites here.
too,
So this is again
But,
the
yeah. I guess it's
Lachua
time of the year
Trail.
They say how the water is. Is there one right there in the water?
And there was quite a few of them flying overhead here, and I'm sitting on a branch of a tree up nice and close. All right, there's one more thing. If you go to Payne's Prairie, you might want to consider, because that's the University of Florida, is in Gainesville, of course, and there's a wonderful museum.
It's called the
there,
Florida Museum
Natural History
of Natural
Museum.
History, right?
There's an art exhibit there, but there is a terrific butterfly garden. It's like a tropical garden in there. It's huge. I think it's, well, for Florida residents, it's around $12.50 to go in. A little bit more for you non-Floridians, and that also is a senior discount
Or veteran.
or veterans.
They have a veterans discount. So it's worth going in. They have docents in there that will tell you about all the different ones. And they'll even say, if you don't recognize any of the butterflies, ask us about it, and we will tell you where they come from and where you can find them in Florida.
And I don't know if it's still true, but I know when I was there a few years ago, they actually had the world's largest collection of butterflies. it actually surpassed the butterfly collection they had in London.
Well, when you first
So-
walk into the area, you will see the pinned collection,
Mm-hmm.
and it's huge. It takes up a very large
Well, I'm
area.
talking about live butterflies.
And then when you go into the butterfly house, you basically get to see them up close and
not
personally.
just butterflies. They got little finches, tropical finches, and everything in there. And I don't know what the little birds that were running around.
They had these little
underground
birds,
were,
and we
yeah.
thought that they were piping in sounds of a red-shouldered hawk.
Yeah.
The sound they were making, it was these little birds.
Little birds like this, with big sound.
Tiny things. But the butterflies, they have two rules. Don't touch the plants, don't touch the butterflies. That means if they land on you, that's okay, but you're not supposed to pick them up, put them on your hand. You're not supposed to touch them. If they land on you, it's okay. They'll eventually fly off. So it's one of those deals where bring your camera and have a great time, because you can get some excellent photographs.
Absolutely.
You're roaming around in there for a while, back and forth, and it's funny because the Dulcins are just smiling at you, going, "Bet you're
Okay.
getting some great pictures, aren't you?" And
Let's show them.
yeah, there you go.
There you go.
I think that would be very cool.
Yeah, the picture is worth 10,000 words, right?